In Judaism, we know for every holiday and for every special day, there is a food. There's something that we celebrate, and we actually, as many of the jokes go, we celebrate with some special food. Hi, Linda. For every special occasion, in Purim we have hamantash, on Hanukkah we have latkes, on Pesach we have matzah. And that's why people say that a Jewish holiday is always the same. Somebody tried to kill us, we won, time to eat. So what about the coming of Moshiach? Are we going to eat? What's going to be the special food? Double hamantash? How's it going to work? So it turns out that there is a lot of discussion in the Medrash and the Talmud, etc., about a special feast, a big party that we're going to have when Moshiach comes. And some of it is really fantastic. It sounds impossible. And we have to understand, what does it mean? What's the purpose of this big feast? What does it teach us? Especially because it has a very unique menu. So we're going to start right away with the menu, and then we'll go from there. That's going to be page 65. Or you have it up on the screen. Rabbi Yudon said, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the behemoth means animals, but this is a reference to the very large ox that we will discuss, known as Shor Habar. And Livyasan will be gain for the righteous in the world to come. So when the Moshiach will come, we will have the Shor Habar and the Livyasan. These are the two main components, shall we say, of the big feast that we will have. The Shor Habar is these tremendous otherworldly dimensions of an ox, and the Livyasan is the same kind of dramatic size of a fish. So when Moshiach comes, the behemoth, which is the Shor Habar, this big ox, and the Leviathan, the big fish, will be game for the righteous. What does that mean? How are they slaughtered? The behemoth gores the Leviathan with its horns and shreds it. And the Leviathan impales the behemoth with its fins and slaughters it. So they actually kill each other. That's how they are prepared for this meal. Now, of course, we have a little problem with that. The sages asked, is this a kosher slaughtering? You can't slaughter an animal with the fin of a fish. That is not kosher. When you go into the kosher supermarket, or thank God now in a general supermarket that carries kosher meat, and it's stamped as kosher by a reliable kosher agency, they are not slaughtering with fins. That would not be kosher, as we'll see right here. The sages asked, is this a kosher slaughtering? The Mishnah states, all may slaughter, and with any implement one may slaughter, except a scythe, a saw, teeth, or a fingernail, since these strangle. So you can use all kinds of knives as long that are effective for slaughtering, but you can't use things that strangle the animal. And this is basically anything which is not straight, which the blade is serrated, not completely sharp as one straight blade, or these other examples, all of which take a slower process to cutting through the flesh, which the Talmud considers strangling the animal. In other words, instead of that pure, perfect, instant cut, it's a slower process, and that's forbidden. It's also painful to the animal. So how can you slaughter with a fin? Same idea. As a scythe, as teeth, as a saw, as some kind of not very fine knife. Rabbi Avin said in the name of Bar Kana, God says, for new teachings shall go forth from me. Novel parts of Torah will go forth from me. Referring to the time of Moshiach, we say, Torah chadasha me'iti teitzei. New teachings of Torah will come forth from God. Things that we did not yet know, we call them the new Torah of the coming of Moshiach. Now, there'll never be a new Torah in the most literal sense. The Torah was given once, and that's our Torah forever. But when Moshiach comes, we're going to have a totally different dimension of understanding of the Torah. We'll try to get back to what that means. And therefore, we're going to know things that we don't know today. And we'll somehow understand why this is okay. So today, if you would take a fit and slaughter an animal, anybody will tell you this is not kosher, please don't eat it. But at the coming of Moshiach, because of the new information we will have, we will understand why this specific example is going to be different than all the other fins and all the other types.
It's true they say that the pigs are going to become kosher after the coming of Moshiach.
That is true too. In the Medrash discusses what does this mean. In fact, in Hebrew, a pig is called chazir. Chazir is the same word as chozer, which means to return. The Talmud says that means it's going to return. When the Torah was given, it was taken away from us. We don't eat it. So it's going to return when the Moshiach comes. But that has to do with the understanding that something is not kosher, it's impure. And when Moshiach comes, the impurity is gone. So a pig or pork might be impure today, but when the impurity is removed from our world, only the good part will stay.
The same will apply to seafood as well.
Possibly, but I don't have a text for that. So we discovered the menu. We're going to have a little bit more on the menu coming. But meanwhile, it's this special fish and this special meat, which we'll talk about again as we proceed, and this very strange way of them slaughtering each other in some process that even the sages in the Talmud had a difficult time contending with. And then we continue to the dignitaries and the blessings that go on by this meal. Let's look at text 2, that's page 66. In the future, God will prepare a feast for the righteous on the day that he extends his mercy to the descendants of Isaac, in other words, the Jewish people. So the time that the Moshiach will come, when we'll have the mercy of God again, when things will be good again, then we will have a feast. After they eat and drink, what happens at the end of the dinner? It's time for the blessing. So the celebrants will give Abraham, our father, a cup of blessing to recite the blessing. People will say, who's going to lead us for the blessing? Abraham, the first and possibly greatest Jew, let's honor him to lead us with the blessing. Abraham will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, for the wicked Yishmael came from me. So I have a problem. I am not perfect. I had a son, Yishmael, who we know from the Torah became a bandit, and he has descendants who were very negative people. I don't want to take the blessing because I bring that also with me to the table. I had a problem in my history. So we move on to another candidate. Who's the next candidate? The next candidate, Abraham will say to Isaac, his son, take the cup and recite the blessing. Isaac will say to them, I will not recite the blessing as the wicked Esau came from me. So same problem. He also had a son who was a very problematic person, a criminal, who also had descendants, enemies of the Jewish people and really enemies of mankind. So he also doesn't want to take that honor of making the blessing at this feast. So Isaac will say to Jacob, take the cup and recite the blessing. Jacob will say to them, I will not recite the blessing as I married 2 sisters in their lifetimes, and the Torah would later forbid them to me. This is an interesting story for itself. But Jacob had 2 wives who were sisters, as he was originally deceived and etc. But that the Torah forbids that. So of course, when Jacob did that, it was before the Jews were in Egypt, before Mount Sinai, before the Torah was given. So there was no such thing as forbidden. But nevertheless, that marriage would not be accepted by the Torah. So he says, my marriage is not okay anymore. Now, it was then, so I don't want to step up and take the honor. So Jacob will say, we'll say to Moses, take the cup and recite the blessing. He must be good for the job. Moses will say to them, I will not recite the blessing as I did not merit to enter Israel, neither in my life nor in my death. He not only died on the east side of the river and did not go into Israel, but he was also buried there. So I, as somebody who never made it to Israel, even after the 40 years of traveling, I can't take the blessing. Moses will say to Joshua, who was his student and successor, take the cup and recite the blessing. Joshua will say to them, I will not recite the blessing as I did not merit to have a son. So each one is mentioning their imperfection and therefore they wouldn't want to lead the blessing. Finally, Joshua will say to David, King David that is, take the cup and recite the blessing. David will say to them, I will recite the blessing. It is fitting for me to recite the blessing. As it is stated, I will lift up the cup of salvation, and I will call upon the name of God. So finally, David will be the one who will actually do this. So that gives us another glimpse at what's going on at this feast. I mean, imagine the coming of Moshiach and the resurrection. All the great people from all the ages are sitting around the table together, so much so that we're looking for the most perfect candidate to say the blessing. I mean, today, any Shabbat, we have dinner and we say the blessing. We're not so picky about who's going to say the blessing. But then we're going to say, wow, all the greatest people of all of history are here. Who's going to be the one that's going to lead the blessing? So just imagine this kind of feast. So of course the big question is this for real? Is this feast actually going to happen? Or is it one of the midrashic teachings which are a metaphor and not necessarily going to happen? Especially when we consider some of the dramatic things that are said about this feast, like different people getting different portions of the meat according to different mitzvahs they did in their life, or God taking the skin of the fish and creating a sukkah, creating walls around all the people, all kinds of drama going on. Is this really going to happen, or is this a metaphor? That's always the automatic question. Well, interestingly, Rambam Maimonides makes a statement that some people took to mean that he did not believe that the meal would actually happen, but he thought it was an example, it was a metaphor, it was just a teaching. Let's see that in text 3 on page 68. So Rambam writes in the laws of tshuva, laws of repentance, the good beyond which there can be no other good. I'm missing the word here. This was the good desired by all the prophets. The sages referred to this good, which is prepared for the righteous, by the metaphor feast. Said the ultimate good, the ultimate perfection, the ultimate time of Moshiach that we hope for is the good, the end of all good. That's the end goal. And the sages called this the feast that we will come to. So when you see this, you might think Rambam believes it will not be an actual feast. It's a metaphor. It's an example for the end goal. You're working till that point, and then you reach the goal, you reach the party, you reach the feast. And there are some commentaries of the Rambam that read it this way. But the conventional understanding, even of the Rambam himself, is that it was not his intention. But he's trying to talk, he talks about, in that chapter, he's not talking about the feast of the coming of Moshiach. He's talking about the end goal of mankind. And he mentions, you see here, that is called a feast in the Talmud, because there are other places in the Talmud. For example, the Talmud says in Pirkei Avot that Hakol Masukon L'Suda, everything is ready for the feast. That kind of passage is not talking actually about this feast per se, but about the end goal, about reaching the destination. And that's what Rambam is saying here, but not that Rambam actually believed that there won't be a feast. So ultimately, there is such an opinion, and there is such a rabbis who did write that it's going to be, it's just a metaphor and there won't actually be that feast. But when we'll see that the consensus and the conventional understanding, including our understanding, is that there will actually be this feast. We will actually sit down and eat this fish and this meat and go through this process. And we read that right here in Marsha, Rabbi Shmuel Yezer Halevi. Know this, we ought to believe all these matters in their simple, literal sense. Though many commentaries interpret it in various ways, they do not supplant the plain meaning. So yes, there's all kinds of deeper understandings here and different things that are meant, but those things are not to take away from the actual story. This is something the Rebbe writes in almost exactly the same points. I know previously that it was also written 500 years earlier by the Marsha, but the Rebbe writes almost in exactly the same terms, and this is common for Chassidus, for these teachings of the mysticism within the Torah, that the mysticism is great, and there's all this deeper meaning. What's the ox all about? What's the fish all about? Some of that we're going to talk about. But it doesn't take away from the literal meaning. The literal meaning is always going to remain. It's a good point for me to interject about our next course. Because our next course, which was supposed to be in the spring when everything was shut down, is called Secrets of the Bible. We'll do this later in the fall, end of October, beginning of November, after the holidays. Secrets of the Bible is there to explain to us the deeper meaning of all these crazy stories in the Torah, like somebody ate an apple and everything went crazy, or there was a flood, or all these things going on. What do they actually mean in Chassidus? What do they actually mean in the deeper sense? But we always have to remember what we're talking about here. That doesn't take away the story. There was actually Adam, there was actually Eve, they were real people. They lived in a real place, and they ate from the tree that God told them not to, and that was a problem. Now we could talk till the cows go home about what it means, but that's not going to change the story itself. Same kind of idea here. We're going to talk about mystical meanings for this feast, but we still understand it will actually be a feast. We'll sit around the table. There won't be any COVID then, so we can sit together around the table and say a good l'chaim and have this feast. It's actually expected to happen.
The feast, or it's going to include the whole?
Well, the passage we read speaks only of Jews, but we do know from other sources that righteous Gentiles will also be a part of the coming of Moshiach. So maybe at the feast too. I don't have a reading for that for this feast specifically, but I don't see that that's not possible.
They will let them know later.
We'll take reservations, you know. It's going to be a big crowd. So, we really have a dramatic feast and dramatic stories in the Talmud about these, let's call them unbelievable creatures. The Livyasan, the Shor Habar, this fish and this ox. How big they were, so big. I'm not going to read the passage, it's so big that the Torah tells us if there would be two, if there would be a male and female and they would reproduce, it would overwhelm the world. So big that the ox is eating mountains full of grass every day. Very dramatic explanations and teachings about how powerful, how big, and how special these fish and ox were or are.
Will the meals be prepared by humans, or it will be God's preparation?
That I haven't seen that discussed, but it seems like that the actual meat will be, killed by each other, and then it's available for somebody to prepare. I don't know who the chef would be, but so some of these dramatic teachings are possibly a metaphor. They're not necessarily literal, but the feast itself remains literal. And then we have text 6. Text 6 is on page 70. What is this reward about which it is stated, no eye has seen it? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, that is the wine that has been preserved in its grapes since the 6 days of creation, and which no eye has ever seen. So, if you make wine and you age it well, time is a blessing. It ages better and better. So you can always say, well, what if we would have started earlier? We would have aged the wine, we would have started a little earlier, we would have aged the wine for a little longer, maybe it would be even better wine. Maybe it would be even greater and more something special about this wine. Well, it turns out that God had that idea, and right at the beginning of creation, he prepared the first wine to let it age all the way until today and all the way until the coming of Moshiach. So at that feast, we need something to go along with all this meat and fish, and that's the special wine that God prepared for that time. When we talk about the deeper meanings of all of this, the wine is a lot easier for us to deal with because we're used to wine meaning the deeper and inner secret. The Talmud says when you drink wine, the secret comes out. Sometimes the results are not so good. So, but that means that wine has the capacity to bring out what's inside. And that's also the reason why wine is coming out from inside of the grape. If you just have a grape, you don't have wine. You have to first get it out from inside and then prepare it. It's not what you see at first glance. It's what's deeper and greater after the effort and after uncovering. So wine is an easy metaphor. We understand that when we talk about the great wine of a great time, it's also talking about finding the deepest greatness within ourselves. And the older, better aged wine, more powerful, richer, is also talking about a richer revelation of our neshama and a richer expression of ourselves and of the deeper part of the Torah and the deeper part of appreciating the world we live in. So now we get to come and understand the more of the mystical secrets or the deeper understanding behind this meal, and particularly the difference between the fish and the meat. The fish and the meat, the two big features here of this meal, are going to be each representing something specific and something special about this special meal and really about us and about the coming of Moshiach. As we go into that, let's look at this teaching from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, a very well-known Hasidic Rebbe, who tells us something unique about these two parts of the story, the literal and the mystical meaning. He says the future banquet for the righteous will be experienced on two levels. This is text 8, so it's page 74. One as a simple meal, and another will be a spiritual opportunity to uncover the secrets of Torah as explained in the Zohar. They are both true. For more ordinary folk, whose conception of pleasure is limited to the material, it will be a physical meal. For the righteous, whose conception of pleasure is secrets of the Torah, the meal will be an opportunity to uncover great wonders of the Torah. So you ever met the fellow who did something dramatic for the king? I don't remember, it's the story didn't actually happen, so I don't remember what exactly it was, but you can pick your analogy. He saved the king's life. He did something special. And the king wanted to give him a very special gift. And he actually gave him a very rare and exquisite parrot, something which wasn't like today where you can buy it in a pet shop, but the king had the one in the whole kingdom. It had been brought from the tropics with great challenge and expense, and he gave it to this peasant who had saved his life or whatever it was. A while later, they meet up again, and the king says, "How are you enjoying my bird?" He says, "Your Majesty, I truly appreciate your gift. Anything given to me, I appreciate. I never ask for more, but so little meat." So that it illustrates how two people can take the same thing and appreciate it or take it only on the surface level. So everybody will sit around the table and everybody will eat these special foods. And everybody will also be a part of this greater meaning that is behind all of that. But not everybody is necessarily going to appreciate it. Some people will think it's just meat, and then the meat is over and meat is over. We're going to learn about it and hopefully grow to appreciate that it's not just meat. Yeah, you can have that too, but there's more to the picture.
Men and women will be sit together or still separate?
The table was in place. It's just during the dummy, that's when
We may have to negotiate it because some of the men want to drink more, and so they like to separate so their wives don't complain. So
Okay, I could sit together.
Let's leave Dr. Speaks out of it.
So when we get to the deeper meaning of the fish and the ox, we're really touching upon the deeper meaning and a deeper struggle, you can call it, between two types of people, two types of reality, two types of serving God in this world. Remember Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, also known as Rajvi. We celebrate him on Lag BaOmer. He and his son escaped from the Romans. This is after there was a conversation in the synagogue among the rabbis, and they talked about the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon said, he wasn't politically correct. He said the Romans, they're persecuting us. Even the good they did here is part of the problem. He was, firm about the Romans, and of course the Romans were in control, and they were going to kill him for those statements. So he and his son spent 13 years in a cave. While in the cave, thank God, there was a carob tree outside the cave and a stream of water, obviously prepared but for God for them, and that's how they lived for all those years. So they had very little, and they obviously did not have a lulav or an etrog when Sukkot came, because they were just in the same cave. And I don't know if they had matzah when Passover came. You can't make matzah out of carobs, etc., etc. So they were not a part of our physical world and even our physical fulfillment of mitzvahs in the world. They were in a totally spiritual reality. Think about the Zohar that Rabbi Shimon wrote, product of spending time like that in total mysticism, total search of God, and becoming the master of the Kabbalah and of the halachic teachings of the Torah. This was a totally different kind of life, and even a totally different kind of tzaddik. Somebody who doesn't notice, who isn't a member of the physical life in this world. Then you have the rest of us, people who try to do good things, try to do mitzvahs, try to do the Torah's teachings, try to help each other, but we do that as part of the physical life of the physical material world we live in. In that case, we are challenged. Sometimes that material world drags us down. It's not only about doing the mitzvahs and the good things in this world. This reality presents challenges and makes life difficult for us, makes life sometimes less holy, less positive, less good. That's why we make mistakes. That's why we sometimes make the wrong choices. So which is better? Is it better to be all spiritual, but then not ever make this world a better place, not have any impact, not have any contribution on the physical world we live in? Or is it better to not be so spiritual, which means that sometimes you won't be so perfect either? It's an automatic, inevitable result. But when you do the right thing, you'll change, you'll transform, you'll enhance this physical world, you'll make a difference. What's the better of the two?
It depends what are you looking from your own self or from society. It depends what point of view. Everyone position. It depends from what point you look in this position.
So this is a very good answer.
Change opinion from point.
This is a very correct answer, because Dimitri says there's no right or wrong here. It depends what you're looking for. Which direction, which perspective are you coming from? For me personally, it might be great to be all spiritual all the time, and who cares about anybody else? For the benefit of society and for the world we live in, it will be great to make a contribution, even if that comes at cost. And that is actually the true and correct answer. Each one of these have an advantage, and we want both, and we don't get both. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle in the broader picture of history. It's a struggle between the different types of lifestyles, the lifestyle of Rabbi Shimon and the lifestyle of most people. It's a struggle within somebody's life. You can have a yeshiva student who studies the Torah, around the clock, full time, and he lives in that environment. And there is no, realistically speaking, there isn't much relevance to what's going on in the world around him. So he's in that spiritual state, even though he's not quite hiding in a cave. So that's good. But then he can't make a contribution. When he finally comes and he graduates the yeshiva and it's time to make a contribution in this world, he might find challenges that he didn't anticipate. So he's now stuck on the other side of the coin. Which of these are better? You want to have both. You want to have the full experience, the full spirituality, the full godliness of just being totally committed to God all the time. And you want to be able to make a contribution. And you want to fulfill God's goal and God's mission of making this world a better place. It's a constant balance that's very hard to strike. In fact, it exists in the temples, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. There were two. The third one is a combination of the two, because each of them had an advantage. The first one, King Solomon's temple, was the much holier one. There was an ark, the Aron, God's presence was felt there. There was miracles there all the time. It was very spiritual. Very spiritual also meant that it was very distant. It was less engaged in the physical world. People were less able to connect. And that's ultimately, they couldn't appreciate it and it didn't survive. The second temple was much more realistic. There was no ark. It was built by regular people for the most part. Life there was much closer to normal, which is also why it was larger. It lasted longer because it was more integrated in the physical world. But on the other hand, it was missing that energy, that great special flavor that you get from that complete connection to God all the time. So it also didn't survive. It didn't have that power to constantly be there and constantly overcome the obstacles. Sometimes the obstacles overcome me. So the golden way would be to have both. But it's not really possible to have both. You're on one side of the coin or the other. And this is where this feast comes in, and Leviathan and the Shor Habar. Because imagine a creature on land, a great and powerful, tremendous mammal, land creature, the ox that we're talking about. That represents the regular world. Maybe a tzaddik, maybe a successful experience in the regular world. But the regular world, part of the world we live in, where fish in Kabbalistic tradition is always the hidden world, the abstract, separate world, because the fish are under the water. We don't know what's going on there. And in fact, in halacha, in Jewish law, fish and the water are considered the same. There's no distinction between the fish and the water. They're so blended in with each other. That's why people say a fish out of water. What's a fish out of water? It's the end. The fish and the water are always together. The water and it's like a complete, perfect unit. And something that we don't see and we don't appreciate. We don't know about it. It's the hidden world. So the fish represents that kind of spiritual life that we can just imagine, while the ox represents the effort to make a difference in the physical world. And here's where they have to come together in the coming of Moshiach. Let's look at text 9, page 76. This is from the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad. There are two types of tzaddikim. The hidden ones, whose religious service is spiritual in nature, namely with the intent of spiritual unifications. All they're doing is spiritual all the time. They're not even doing anything physical. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai hid in a cave for 13 years, was one such tzaddik. While there, he certainly couldn't fulfill any mitzvah. After all, he lived off a carob tree and a stream created especially for him. He couldn't eat matzah on Passover, make kiddush on wine, nor shake a loaf of etrog on Sukkot. These things were just not possible. The second type of tzaddik are those in plain view. They engage with material matter, performing physical mitzvah, which also draw down intense godly energy. Because when you do the mitzvahs in this world, you're accomplishing the godly purpose. Now, the former type of tzaddik, called creature of the sea, climbs to dizzying heights, like fish that swiftly swim from one end of the sea to the other. These tzaddikim swiftly climb to the greater heights than those who work with material, bogged down as they are with lowly matter. Imagine you have no body to weigh you down, no extra pounds, no physical, none of that. You can just fly like the fish streaming across the water. And that's what Rabbi Shimon, that's what that kind of tzaddik does. While the others are busy struggling with the realities of this world. In future times, the Leviathan will battle the Shor Habar and slaughter it with his fins. The second type of tzaddik was represented by the Shor Habar, whose engagement with material matter is obviously not simply to fill their bellies with meat and revel in it, God forbid, rather to sublimate it, namely to fuel a passionate rejoicing with God, inasmuch as their path is inferior to the spiritual tzaddik. The Leviathan will not slaughter the Shor Habar, namely she will elevate it. The reality is that the Shor Habar will also elevate the Leviathan. For in a certain way, the Shor Habar tzaddik performs a greater service. Though his path is mired in material matter, the fact is that this is what the Torah prescribes: you should rejoice in your festivals. Joy is only with meat and wine. From this perspective, the Shor Habar will elevate the Leviathan. So they each have an advantage. These two types of attitudes towards serving God, two types of lifestyles that the fish and the ox represent, each have an advantage. When we talk about them killing each other, the idea is that they're each blending with each other. They're each taking the other one to the full extreme of what they have to offer. The Leviathan says, my way is the all spiritual way with God. Let me take you there too. I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to take you to a totally new reality. While the ox says the same thing to Leviathan. In other words, it's the time of the combination of these two things. When the Moshiach will come, we will live in the physical world. We were talking about this some of the other weeks. We will not be all spiritual. We will have bodies. We will live in the physical world. We will do the physical mitzvah. But we will be focused constantly on God. The challenges of this physical world will no longer bother us. They will no longer be present. We will live in the physical world, do that physical contribution, be a part of a society that we're improving and contributing to, but still have that complete spiritual experience like Rabbi Shimon had in the cave. So these two coming together are that purpose. It might be enough to have a fish dinner and have this tremendous special fish. Why do we need also the ox? Some people prefer the steak. Let's have a steak dinner. But we're having both. And they're slaughtering each other because the idea is these two things will come together to make that final total picture. This is why the Rebbe says in this passage right at the end, page 78, text 10, that the Leviathan slaughter in the Shor Habar is the sum total of our entire work during exile of transforming the world. Then the ultimate power of our religious devotion will be revealed, namely that the loftiest levels of godliness, like the Leviathan of the hidden world, will be exposed in the manner of the Shor Habar in a revealed way. So this is really saying the same idea, how this is why the moment, the peak, the goal is that moment when these two slaughter each other, that moment when everything reaches its completion, when we have the full and best way of serving God as part of society and part of making a contribution, although it's challenging. And together with that, we rise above the challenges to stay spiritual and connected. That also means that that's something that we could do. When we prepare, when we hope, when we pray for the coming of Moshiach, we're also supposed to contribute. We can also think about where in my life can I bring in more of the spiritual side, and where in my life can I bring in more of the looking around me and the helping and contributing and making a difference. Where can I bring that side in as well? Because what's going to happen then is really both. A couple more thoughts that are relevant here, unless there are some questions. The first is this idea of the feast. Not talking necessarily about the feast, but about what this means. This means, in other words, a great gathering, a great moment of all of us coming together with all of the Jewish people of history, with all the great giants, and this great moment of the coming of Moshiach, that great spectacle, that great experience. Well, what are we going to be like at that moment? Are we going to be proud of ourselves and of the contribution we made and the life we led? Or are we going to say, whoa, 1 second, all the real tzaddikim are coming here. I look really bad in this environment. I can't keep up. Are we going to be ready for that feast, dressed and prepared, or are we going to be kind of embarrassed at who we are? I had a friend who, when we were, I must have mentioned in the past the time that I spent in the Chabad in Italy, in Venice. We would reach out to the Jewish tourists coming through the summertime, spent a number of summers there as a yeshiva student. A lot of interesting experiences. So you often had these groups, Israeli tour groups. They'd come like in a whirlwind. They had this attitude. They're not on vacation, they're on a mission. The mission is to see like all of Europe in 4 days, things like that. So they would come in and out, and they had places to go and things to do. They're next. So they would come sometimes early in the morning, and they already had 2 stops that morning. Anyway, they'd come in these groups, and you had to like give them something, do something for them before they're gone. So this friend of mine had this quick and very energetic style, and he used to sing and greet these people and etc. And then he would always say the same story. There's a story, and this is a known Hasidic parable, a story of 2 brothers. 2 brothers, very close. They were the only siblings, the 2 children of their parents. They grew up together. They did everything together, maybe a little too much. Very, very special, powerful bond. They got married. They lived in the same neighborhood. They were very, very closely associated in every way, and everybody knew it. And then it happened. What happened? They finally got into a fight. And as sometimes is the case, as powerful as the love and the connection is, when it goes bad, it goes really bad. It goes way down the hill, and it was really, really bitter. It was one of those cases where 30 years later, they don't invite you to the bar mitzvah. It was really, they didn't talk to each other. It was over. Everybody knew that the sweet turned to sour 100%. Years went by, and one brother is marrying off his oldest or only daughter. And at this moment, he's thinking to himself, okay, it's been so many years, but I have one brother, and I have one daughter, and I have one night that I'm going to be happy my daughter is getting married. My brother's not going to be there. So he sent him an invitation, as difficult as it was for him. The guy sent the invitation back. He's not coming. What do you do? So he came up with a plan. He knew, as did everybody else, that his brother was very, very fond of music, and at certain strains of music that he felt very strongly about. And he had a particular melody that he really loved. And it would overwhelm him. He would become transfixed if he heard a good performance of this tune. He'd stop everything and just focus on that, follow it, just be transfixed and go with it. So he hatches this plan. He is going to get his brother to the wedding using this tune. Meanwhile, the wedding night comes, and his brother, I'm not going. He's going to bed early. I'm not thinking about this wedding. This is not for me. I too much pain. I'm not going to talk to my brother ever again. Let him send me as many invitations as he wants. Going to bed early. He gets into pajamas. He goes to bed. He can't sleep. Time is passing. He hears music. And the music is getting louder and louder and louder. The whole orchestra left the hall, and they're outside his window. And they're playing, and they start to play his favorite song. And he gets out of bed, and he's listening. And it's really well done. It's beautiful. Following the song. And you can imagine, he goes downstairs. He comes outside. He follows the music. They take him all the way to the wedding hall. They drag him in. He's already part of the dance. It's too late. And the brothers make up in this moment that they just unplanned. He was there. Finally, it's winding down. Maybe a photographer's getting the last few pictures. And this unplanned guest finally takes a step back from all of this celebration, and he realizes he's still wearing his pajamas. Wearing his pajamas, what's going on? He told them they were so embarrassed. Everybody was still looking at me. Everybody was shopping for 3 months to find how they wanted to come to the wedding, and I'm wearing my pajamas. Of course, he was unprepared. And this is the idea. Don't come to Moshiach unprepared. Moshiach will come. We'll have this great feast, this great moment. In other words, the coming of Moshiach is not just the change in the world overall, but it's a great opportunity and a great specific time. And at that great feast and at that tremendous moment, what am I going to look like? What do I bring to the table? Will I be proud of it? Will I feel like all these great tzaddikim, like the Rebbe, is proud of what I contributed? As they say, these are their students, these are our children, these are the ones who did their best? Or maybe I'll be not so comfortable from the kind of dress I'm coming with to the table. So bottom line, as we wrap up this kind of course, that's what we really need to think about. It's good to talk about what exactly is going to happen and what the menu will be, and it's well done or rare. We could talk about all of that. But what's really relevant is what we're going to do. And we're going to do that. We should come to that table ready, looking our best, because we're really being our best inside. That's for all of us to think about as we go forward. Hopefully not for too long, because the Moshiach is coming really soon. Before we take any remaining questions, I just want to remind everyone that Rosh Hashanah is that close. September 19th and 20th, and 18th in the evening. And this year, because of Shabbat, we blow the shofar only on the 20th. We'll be doing that here during the prayer, which you can join inside or outside. And then we'll do the shofar later, multiple times really, later in the afternoon, outside for people that do not want to participate in the whole prayer at this current time. So most important, join. Most important, share with your friends that don't worry, the synagogue is open.
We have to register
And
for Shofar?
it's very helpful, and that's why we ask everybody to register, because we don't know how many people will come, particularly this year. And we need to set out space for everybody spread apart. So that's very important, including also for Yom Kippur at the Westin, because they're limiting the amount of people they allow in. We need to plan for it. And I did receive your registration, so you're good. So that's just the reminder. And then, of course, after the holidays, we'll continue with our next course. Hopefully, the world will have advanced to the point where we can all sit a little closer together again. We'll see what happens then. But either way, our next course will be, as I mentioned, the secrets of the Bible, that deeper meaning of these strange stories of the Torah.
So the feast is going to be